after Nostromo, there was Saguelsa, the carrion world. Home. Our second home, at least. We had a fortress here, long ago. A castle of black stone and twisting spires. The Primarch dreamed of it one night, and set hundreds of thousands of slaves to making it. It took almost 20 years. The inner sanctum was called the Screaming Gallery. A metaphor of a kind. A god's torment expressed in blood and pain. The Primarch wanted to reshape the external world to match the sin within his mind. The walls were flesh, humans molded and grafted into the architecture, formed as much from sorcery as from ingenuity. The floors were carpeted in living faces, preserved by feeder servitors. The screaming, Octavia. You have never heard such a sound. They never stopped screaming. The people in the walls, crying and reaching out. The faces on the floor, weeping and shrieking. The foulest thing was the way you'd become immune to the wailing chorus. Those of us who attended the Primarch in his last decades of madness spent much of our time in the Screaming Gallery. The sound of all that pain became tolerable. Soon after, you found yourself enjoying it. It was easier to think when surrounded by sin. The torment first became meaningless, but afterwards, it became music. That was what he wanted, of course. He wanted us to understand the Legion's lesson as he believed it to be. The Primarch knew that law and order, the twin foundations of civilization, are only maintained through fear of punishment. Man is not a peaceful animal. It is a creature of war and strife. To force the beasts into civilization, one must remind them that excruciation awaits those who harm the herd. For a time, we believed the Emperor wanted this of us. He wanted us to be the angels of death. And for a time, we were. Some say he betrayed us. Once our use was complete, he turned against us. Others claim that we'd merely taken our self-appointed role too far and had to be put down, like animals ourselves, for slipping our leashes. None of that is important. What matters is how it began and how it ended. The Legion had taken immense casualties in the Great Crusade, in service to the Emperor. Most of these were Terran. They came from Terra, from the Emperor's wars across humanity's birth planet. But all of our reinforcements came from our home world, Nostromo. Decades had passed since the Primarch last walked upon the world's surface, and his lessons of law had long since died. The population slid back into lawless anarchy, with no fear of punishment from a distant Imperium. Do you understand how we were poisoning ourselves? We were repopulating the Legion with rapists and murderers, with children who were the blackest sinners before they'd even tasted adulthood. The Primarch's lessons meant nothing to them, meant nothing to most of the 8th Legion at the end. They were slayers, raised to become demigods, with the galaxy as their prize to plunder. In wrathful desperation, the Primarch burned our home world. He destroyed it, breaking it apart from orbit with the firepower of the entire Legion fleet. It took hours, Octavia. All the while, we remained aboard our ships, listening to vox calls from the surface, sending their screams and pleas up to us in the heavens. We never answered. Not even once. We stayed in space and watched our own cities burn. At the very end, we watched the planet heaving, breaking apart beneath the fleet's rage. Only then did we turn away. Nostromo disintegrated into the void. I have never seen anything like it again. I know, in my heart, I never will. It didn't work. The Legion was poisoned by then. You know that Zarl and I grew up together, murderers even as children. We joined the Legion late, when Nostromo's venom was already rich in the Legion's veins. And believe me when I say that where he and I grew up, among the street wars and the cheapness of human life, it was one of the more civilized regions of Nostromo's inner cities. Much of the planet was in the throes of devolution, lost to urban wastelands and scavenger armies. As the strongest candidates, they were usually the ones chosen for implantation and ascension to the 8th. They were the ones to become legionaries. By then, it was too late. Primarch Kurz was in the throes of degeneration himself. He hated himself, he hated his life, and he hated his Legion. All he craved was one last chance to be right, to show that he'd not wasted his entire existence. The rebellion against the Emperor, that war of myth that you call the Horus Heresy, was over. We'd turned against the Imperium that sought to punish us, and we'd lost. So we ran. We ran to Saguarsa, a world outside the Imperium's borders, away from Terra's beacon of light that he claimed still stung his eyes. We ran here, and here is where it ended. By the end, the Primarch was riddled through by madness. He cared nothing for the long war, wanting nothing beyond bleeding the Imperium and vindicating his life's path. He knew he was going to die, Octavia. He wanted to be right when he died. But humanity has to know fear. Nothing else ensures compliance. By the very end, when the Screaming Gallery was the Legion's war room and council chamber alike, the Primarch's degeneration had devoured him from within. He was rendered hollow by it. I still remember how regal he looked to us, how majestic our father was to our adoring eyes. But looking at him was like growing used to a disgusting smell, You could forget the foulness, just as you can ignore the scent. But when something reminds you of it, you perceive it with renewed strength. His soul had rotted away by the end, and on some nights you could see it in the flash of his dying eyes, or the bleak shine of his teeth. Some of my brothers asked if he were tainted by some outer power, but most of us no longer cared. What did it matter? The end result was the same. The assassination came soon after, when his mad clarity was at its height. I have never seen a creature so placidly delighted by the thought of its own destruction. In death, he would be vindicated. Those who break the law must be dealt with in the most violent, lethal way, as an example to all who would consider betrayal. So he set us butchering across the galaxy, breaking every law against reason and rhyme, knowing the Emperor would prove the point all too well. The assassin came to slay Curse, the great breaker of imperial law. And she did just that. I saw him die, vindicated, pleased for perhaps the first time in centuries. The universe has never seen a living being that loathed being alive as much as my father. His life was broken in seeking to prove how humanity could be controlled. And his death was a sacrifice to prove that the species was ultimately wretched.
Go on then. Make your case. Why would I help you?
I require specialist information that I'm certain you have. Certain law.
You are an Inquisitor, Eisenhorn. All the resources of the Imperium are at your disposal. Am I to understand that, well, that your scope has become somewhat limited?
What I need might be regarded as prescribed knowledge. What? What?
So, you finally reached that place. How wonderful.
What place?
The place where you cross the line.
I have...
All Inquisitors cross the line eventually.
I tell...
All of them. It's an occupational hazard.
Listen to me, you worthless...
Methinks Inquisitor Eisenhorn protests too much. The line, Gregor. The line. The line between order and chaos. Between right and wrong. Between mankind and man unkind. I know it because I've crossed it. Willingly, of course. Gladly. Skipping and dancing and delighting. For the likes of you, it is a more painful process.
I don't think this conversation is going anywhere, Glor. I'm leaving.
So soon. It was on Quenthus 8, in the spring of 19.M41.
What was?
The moment I crossed the line, 19.M41. I was on Quenthus 8, buying fighters for my pit games. They're a good breed, the Quenthi. I was perhaps 25. One of the pit marshals at the amphitheater I was visiting advised me to see a fighter who had been brought in from the very edges of the Ultima Segmentum. A great, tanned fellow from a feral world called Borea. His name was Ah. This Ah was a piece of work. He was a true find. They kept him shackled permanently. The pit marshal told me that he'd torn a fellow prisoner's arm off during transit and scalped a careless stadium guard with his teeth.
Charming.
I bought him, of course. I think he liked me. He had no real language, naturally, and his table manners. He slept in his own soil and rutted like a canine.
No wonder he liked you.
Cruel boy. I am a cultured man. I was a cultured man. Now I am an erudite and dangerous box. But don't forget my learning and upbringing, Eisenhorn. You'll be amazed how easy it is for a well-raised and schooled son of the Imperium to slide across that line I mentioned. The moment was there on Quenthus, in the amphitheater, under the spring sun. The pit marshal showed me Ah, and tempted me to purchase him. Ah looked at me, and I think he saw a kindred soul. In his simple, broken speech, he implored me to buy him, telling me graphically what sport I would have of him. And to seal the deal, he offered me his talk.
His talk?
That's right. The slaves were allowed to keep certain familiar items, provided they weren't potential weapons. Ah wore a golden torque around his neck, the mark of his tribe. It was inlaid with astonishing technology. Borea might have been a beast world by then, but millennia back, it had clearly been an advanced outpost of mankind. It had fallen into a feral dark age because chaos had touched it, and that talk was a relic of the decline. Its forbidden, forgotten technology focused the stuff of the darkness into the wearer's mind. No wonder Borea, where every adult male wore one, was a savage waste. I was intrigued. I put the talk on.
You put it on?
I was young and reckless, what can I say? I put it on. Within a few hours, the tendrils of the warp had suffused my receptive mind. And do you know what?
What?
It was wonderful, liberating. I was alive to the real universe at last. I had crossed the line, and it was bliss. Suddenly, I saw everything as it actually was, not as the Ministorum and the rot-hearted Emperor wanted to see it. Engulfing eternity, the fragility of the human race, the glories of the warp, the fleeting treasure of flesh, the incomparable sweetness of death. All of it.
And you ceased to be Pontius Glor, the seventh son of a respectable imperial house, and became Pontius Glor, the sadistic idolater and abomination.
The boys got to have a hobby.
You think I've crossed the line too, don't you?
Yes. It's in your bearing. You seem like a man who has understood the wider significance of the warp.
Why is that?
I told you, it happens to all Inquisitors sooner or later. I can imagine you as a young man, stiff and puritanical, in the schoolhouse. It must have seemed so simple to you back then. The light and the dark.
Not so obvious these days.
Of course not. Because the warp is in everything. It is there even in the most ordered things you do.
According to you, I'm already damned.
Everyone is damned. Mankind is damned. The whole human species. Chaos and death are the only real truths of reality. To believe otherwise is ignorance. And the Inquisition, so proud and dutiful and full of its own importance, so certain that it is fighting against chaos, is the most ignorant thing of all. Your daily work brings you closer and closer to the warp, increases your understanding of orderless powers. Gradually, without noticing it, even the most puritanical and rod-stiff Inquisitor becomes seduced. The first step is the knowledge. An Inquisitor must understand the basic traits of chaos in order to fight it. In a few years, he knows more about the warp than most untutored cultists. Then, the second step. The moment he breaks the rules and allows some aspect of chaos to survive or remain so that he can study it and learn from it. I wouldn't even bother trying to deny that one, Eisenhorn. I'm right here, aren't I?
You are. But understanding is essential. Even a Puritan will tell you that. Without it, the Inquisition's struggle is hopeless. The third step?
The third step is the line itself. When the Inquisitor becomes a radical, when he chooses to use chaos against chaos, when he employs the agencies of the warp, when he asks the heretical for help.
I see.
I'm sure you do. So, are you going to ask me to help you?
The truth we convey is the truth, because we say it is the truth. Is that enough? I don't believe so. My truth is better than your truth is a schoolyard squabble, not the basis of a culture. I am right, so you are wrong, is a syllogism that collapses as soon as one applies any of a number of fundamental ethical tools. I am right, ergo, you are wrong. Truth and lies. Truth and lies. Great actions have shaped our society. The greatest of these, physically, has been the Emperor's formal and complete unification of terror, the outward sequel to which this great crusade we are now engaged upon. But the greatest intellectually has been our casting off of that heavy mantle called religion. Religion damned our species for thousands of years, from the lowest superstition to the highest conclaves of spiritual faith. It drove us to madness, to war, to murder. It hung upon us like a disease, like a shackle ball. I'll tell you what religion was. Ignorance. Since the earliest times, our species has striven to understand the workings of the cosmos. And where that understanding has failed, or fallen short, we have filled in the gaps, plastered over the discrepancies with blind faith. Religious faith. Belief in demons. Belief in spirits. Belief in an afterlife and all the other trappings of a preternatural existence simply existed to make us all more comfortable and content in the face of a measureless cosmos. Prayers and lucky charms to help us through the darkness. But we have witnessed the cosmos now, my friends. We have passed amongst it. We have learned and understood the fabric of reality. We have seen the stars from behind and found they have no clockwork mechanisms, no golden chariots carrying them abroad. We have realized there is no need for God or any gods, and by extension no use any longer for demons or devils or spirits. The greatest thing mankind ever did was to reinvent itself as a secular culture. But what of faith? Faith has a quality. Even when religion has gone, we still need to believe in something, don't we? Here it is. The true purpose of mankind is to bear the torch of truth aloft and shine it, even into the darkest places. To share our forensic, unforgiving, liberating understanding with the dimmest reaches of the cosmos. To emancipate those shackled in ignorance. To free ourselves and others from false gods and take our place at the apex of sentient life. That is what we may pour faith into. That is what we can harness our boundless faith to. These last months, we have quashed an entire culture. Make no mistake, we haven't brought them to heel or rendered them compliant. We have quashed them, broken their backs, set them to flame. I know this because I know the War Master unleashed his Astartes in this action. Don't be coy about what they do. They are killers, but sanctioned. The souls we have lately conquered believed in an imperium, the rule of man. Nevertheless, we killed their emperor and forced them into submission. We burnt their cities and scuppered their warships. Is all we have to say in response to their why a feeble, I am right, so you are wrong? Yet we are. We are right. They are wrong. This simple, clean faith we must undertake to teach them. We are right. They are wrong. Why? Not because we say so, because we know so. We will not say, I am right and you are wrong, because we have bested them in combat. We must proclaim it because we know it is the responsible truth. We cannot, should not, will not promulgate that idea for any other reason than we know, without hesitation, without doubt, without prejudice, that it is the truth. And upon that truth we bestow our faith. They are wrong. Their culture was constructed upon lies. We have brought them to the keen edge of truth and enlightened them. On that basis, and that basis alone, go from here and iterate our message.
My sons, the galaxy is burning. we all bear witness to a final truth. Our way is not the way of the Imperium. You have never stood in the Emperor's light, never worn the Imperial Eagle, and you never will. You shall stand in midnight clad, your claws forever red with the lifeblood of my father's failed empire. Rise, my sons. Rise, my Night Lords.
Look! They are coming for us because people like you lost their nerve and abandoned their positions. Our lords and masters up there on the walls are turning their guns upon the overrun sections. If you do not hold, if you do not stand and fire in a straight Emperor-beloved line, then you will die. Because if those monsters don't kill you, our own side will. And I, for one, do not wish to die today. You will not let me down. You will hold in 3 lines. You will work your fingers upon the triggers of your guns until they bleed. You will hold your ground. Knights, assume position. First line prone. Second line, kneel. Present arms. Open fire!
Go on then. Make your case. Why would I help you?
I require specialist information.
What have you done? Oh, my brothers, what have you done?
What needed to be done?
Little Horus, tell me what you've done. It is as Ezekiel said. We did what had to be done. The War Master was dying, and Vaden couldn't save him. So we brought him to the Delphos. The Delphos? It is the name of this place. The Temple of the Serpent Lodge.
Temple? Horus, you brought the War Master to a fane? Are you mad?
The commander would never have agreed to this.
Maybe not. But by the end, he couldn't even speak. He spoke to that damn Remembrancer woman for hours on end before he lost consciousness. We had to place him in a stasis field to keep him alive long enough to bring him here.
Is Tarek right? Is this a fane?
Fane, temple, Delphos, House of Healing, call it what you will. With the War Master on the threshold of death, neither religion nor its denial seems very significant anymore. It is the only hope we have left. And what do we have to lose? If we do nothing, the War Master dies. At least this way he has a chance of life.
And at what price will we buy his life? By bringing him to a house of false gods? This goes against everything we have fought for these last 2 centuries. Don't you see that?
If the Emperor was here, he would do the same.
You think you know the Emperor's will, Serga? Does being Lodge Master of a secret society give you the power to know such a thing?
Of course not. But I know he would want his son to live.
By entrusting his life to these savages?
It is from these savages that our own quiet order comes.
Yet another reason for me to distrust it, then. Come on. We're getting the War Master out of there.
You can't.
What do you mean?
It is said that once the Delphos gate is shut, there's no way to open it save from the inside. A man in need of healing is carried inside and left to whatever the eternal spirits of deceased things decree for him. If it is his destiny to live, he may open the gate himself. If not, it opens in 9 days, and his remains are burned before being cast into the pool. Eternal spirits of deceased things? What does that even mean? This is insane. Can't you see that? Standing by and watching him die would have been insane. You judge us for acting out of love. How did you ever think to bring him here anyway? Was it some secret knowledge your damned lodge is privy to? Erebus told you of this place, didn't he? Yes. He knows of these lodges of old, and has seen the power of their healing houses. If the War Master lives, you will be thankful he spoke of it. Where is he? He will answer to me for this. He is not here, Garvey. This was for the sons of Horus to do. And where is he now? Still on the vengeful spirit? I suppose so. Why is it important to you? I believe you have all been deceived, my brothers. Only the Emperor has the power to heal the War Master now. All else is falsehood and the domain of unclean corpse whisperers. The Emperor is not here. We take what aid we can. What of you, Tarek? Will you turn from your Mournival brothers as Garviel does? Stand with us. Garvey may be a starch ass, Ezekiel, but he's right, and I can't stand with you on this one. I'm sorry. You forget your Mournival oath. You swore to be true to the Mournival to the end of your lives. You will be oath breakers. See, the moon shines upon the water, Loken. The crescent mark of the new moon. It was branded upon your helmet when we swore our Mournival oath. It is a good omen, my brother. Omen? Since when have we put our faith in omens, Horus? The Mournival oath was pantomime. But this is ritual. This is sorcery. I told you then that I would not bow to any fane or acknowledge any spirit. I told you that I owned only the empirical clarity of imperial truth, and I stand by those words. Please, Garvey. We are doing the right thing. I believe we will all rue the day you brought the War Master here.
I am Warmonger Princeps Tevera of the Legio Agravadis. We have come to be heard. So hear our voices now and take heed. If the formation of the Adeptus Mechanicus is not approved in this session, then the Collegia Titanica will know where it stands, and we will no longer be the puppets of the Council of Terror. To your eternal shame, you have abandoned sacred Mars, homeworld of my Legio. Now you demand that my comrades forsake their worlds too, to burn undefended beneath the assaults of the traitors. If there is no Adeptus for Mars, there will be no Titans for the Throne World. We will abandon the Solar War and return to our own fiefdoms immediately.
This is treachery! A coup! I will see you executed for this.
This is no coup. It is the resolution of an equation. We understand the necessity of an Adeptus Mechanicus. If you do not, then you must be shown it in terms you can comprehend. The binary succession must be ended.
Oh, I'm tired of this. Let me call in the arbitrators. I will have the Martians arrested and tried for their crimes against the throne. A deep, reverberating impact shook the floor of the chamber, swaying the long lumen sconces hanging from the dome high above. Vetherel and the Titan officers noted it well, but did not react. Another impact, stronger this time, strong enough to be felt in the shudder of the walls. The council delegates in the upper tiers began to glance around at one another in confusion, even as a further tremor shook masonry dust from the ceiling. Then, Mars's greatest voice was heard on Terra. The blast of the war horn cut through the din of the chamber, and all who heard it fell silent. The sound came from far away, but it rattled the dome all the same. The bellow was deep yet piercing, redolent of the greatest majesty of war. Another tremor followed it a few moments later. They were drawing nearer.
What is happening? Ambassador?
The Imperator Magnificum Incendius of the Legio Ignatum walks towards us. The war horn sounded again, louder, nearer, and a moment of shocked quiet descended over the chamber. Thousands were holding their breath at once, listening to the approach of the god machine. One of the most colossal engines of war ever built walked with ominous purpose towards the political heart of the Imperium. It had stepped over the defenses wrought to protect the master of mankind as if they were not there, and now strode down the wide avenues of the outer palace, driving crowds of fleeing citizens before it. Its huge weapon arms cycled up, rotary barrels the length of maglev trains, plasma accelerators that could drive a starship. The Titan's roar was so loud, it seemed as though that alone could bring the palace tumbling down. Emplacement guns were brought awkwardly to bear, having only been intended to fire outwards from the walls. The Custodian Guard and Imperial Auxilia garrisons tried to outflank it, but this was just one single engine of the Collegia Titanica, and there was currently nothing within 100 kilometers that could halt its relentless advance. Panic took hold of the council chamber. There were no windows. No one could see what was coming, yet the sound was enough. Everyone present knew of the holocaust that an Imperator Titan could unleash upon its foes. Its voice was a howl to shatter the heavens. The end was coming. There was no escape and no recourse.
Stop this! You are commanded to stop!
Who commands us? Who commands the Mechanicum? Who commands the Titans? The binary succession is the product both of poor Martian logic and frightful Terran ignorance. And it may prove the death of us all. The beat of the Titan steps were the rhythm of approaching doom. Vetherel looked at Malkador. The Sigillite was watching her steadily. His face was shadowed, expressionless. He said nothing. He was letting the situation play itself out. She felt the Sigillite judging her, waiting to see if, once and for all, she was prepared for what she had set in motion. Or maybe you approve. Maybe you want this too. The blast of the horn overwhelmed the screams in the chamber. People were scrambling over each other to reach the exits from the tiers, fleeing what could not be escaped. But the sound froze them in mid-flight. It was so close, it seemed to come from inside the dome and all around them all at once. The binary succession must be resolved. The Adeptus Mechanicus is the resolution. There can only be 0 or 1. There cannot be both. Otherwise, there is uncertainty. With uncertainty, can there ever truly be loyalty? And if there is no loyalty? The Titan's battle cry came one last time. One more step, and it seemed as though Magnificum Incendius would crush the dome beneath its immense armored foot. Rantal threw up his hands.
Enough!
He stumbled back to the table and sank down into his chair.
Enough!
The other High Lords nodded their agreement, looking shrunken and small beside the other men and women of the council. Vetherel nodded to Tevra, who spoke into her voxbead.
Princeps Basanius, stand down. Why? What have you done to yourself?
Sullen Decius died aboard the Eisenstein. His existence is at an end. I live now. I am the pestilent champion. I am the Lord of the Flies.
Traitor! You followed Grolgor into his grotesque transformation. Look what you have become. A freak. A monster.
A demon. Is that what you were going to say, you hidebound old fool? Is it sorcery that has renewed me? All that matters is that I have cheated death, like a true son of Mortarion.
Why? In Terra's name, why did you give yourself to this abomination?
Because it is the future. Look at me, Captain. I am what the Death Guard is to become. What Grolgor and his men are already. Undying, living avatars of decay, waiting to reap the darkness.
I should have let you perish.
But you did not! Poor Decius, trapped at the edge of mortality, racked with such pain it would grind down a mountain. You could have released him, Garrow. But you let him live in agony, tortured him with every passing moment of a what? Because of your ludicrous belief that he would be saved by your master. He begged you to end him, but you did not listen. He prayed to your precious gaudy emperor for deliverance, and again he was ignored, forsaken.
No, you should have survived. If you had held on, if you could give your spirits in the God Emperor's service.
God! I know God. The power that remade Decius, that is God. The intellect that answered him when he lay praying for the bliss of decease, that is God, not your hollow golden idol.
Blasphemy. You are a blasphemy, and I will not suffer you to live. Your heresy, that of Grolgor, Mortarion, Horus himself, will be crushed.
Fool! The Death Guard are already dead. It is ordained. You cannot kill decay. Corruption comes to all things. Men die. The stars burn cold.
Be silent.
You think you can stop me? I carry the Lord of Decay's mark. I was right, Garrow. I see the future. In 10,000 years, the galaxy will burn.
What have I done? Throne, save me. What have I done? What needed to be done? Fulgrim heard the voice as a sibilant whisper in his ear, the breath of the speaker hot on his neck. He twisted his neck, but there was nothing to be seen, no unseen speaker or mysterious presence. "He's dead," whispered Fulgrim.
Below the burning walls of Oannis gun tower, Fulgrim smiled. His teeth gleamed in the firelight. His long white hair blew out in the night wind, dancing like the vast tongues of flames above him.
"You're very young," he said. He crouched beside the imperial fist, sprawled on the wall top.
"Very young. New to this,"
he whispered. Madius was trying to crawl. His bones were as broken as his warplate. He had lost his helm somewhere, and his face was drenched in blood. Every shaking move took supreme effort. Every centimetre he dragged himself through the slick of his own blood was a triumph of will.
"Are you trying to escape?"
Fulgrim asked. He tutted.
"I don't think you're supposed to do that. Your father doesn't like it. You're supposed to stand and fight. But then, you are new. Maybe no one's had time to tell you the rules."
The Phoenician looked around. Across the broad top of the Saturnine wall, his children were massacring the wall guard garrison. Still more of his children.
Einst schuf sich der Imperator 20 Söhne, um die Milchstraße zu beherrschen. Doch noch während sie heranreiften, öffneten die Chaosgötter einen Raumriss in der Brutkammer, der sie in der gesamten Milchstraße verteilte. Die Inkubatorkapsel des Primarchen Konrad Curse strandete auf dem Planeten Nostramo, der sich am Rand der Milchstraße befand, und bohrte sich beim Aufschlag tief in den Planetenmantel. Die erschrockenen Bewohner zögerten nicht lange und schütteten den Einschlagskrater, der sich inmitten ihrer Hauptstadt befand, einfach wieder zu. Konrad war somit gezwungen, sich mit bloßen Händen freizugraben, nur um festzustellen, dass er auf einem der melancholischsten Orte gelangt war, den die Milchstraße hervorbrachte. Nostramo war eine Nachtwelt, in der der Großteil in bitterer Armut lebte. Eine reiche Oberschicht unterdrückte mit ihren Schergen die einfache Bevölkerung und beutete diese hemmungslos aus. Die Kriminalitätsrate war hoch und um zu überleben, gingen die Bewohner bis ans Äußerste. Zwischen Dreck und dem ständigen Gestank des Zerfalls waren Krankheit, Diebstahl, Mord, Kannibalismus, aber auch Suizide, um dem Elend zu entkommen, Bestandteil des täglichen Lebens. Der junge Primarch hielt sich als Aasfresser am Leben, während er die Welt, Kultur und Sprache allmählich zu verstehen lernte. Konrad hatte einen tiefen Gerechtigkeitssinn und begann bald jede Form der Kriminalität zu verfolgen und zu bestrafen. Die Verderbnis war allerdings bereits so tief in die Köpfe der Menschen eingedrungen, dass der Tod sie nicht davon abschrecken konnte, Verbrechen zu begehen. Durch Terror und Schrecken brachte Konrad die Menschen schließlich dazu, ihn mehr zu fürchten als den Tod. Ganze Straßengangs, korrupte Beamte oder groß organisierte Verbrechersyndikate verschwanden über Nacht spurlos. Einige versuchten vergeblich Jagd auf ihn zu machen, im verzweifelten Versuch, diese Weltordnung und den Status, den sie innehatten, zu bewahren. Doch im Schatten bestimmte Konrad die Regeln. Ihre Körper hingen bald gehäutet von den Dächern, ihre Köpfe gefehlt auf öffentlichen Plätzen und teilweise bis zur Unkenntlichkeit verstümmelt. Es war eine Warnung an all jene, die es wagen sollten, ihn und seine Gesetze herauszufordern. Zu dieser Zeit erhielt er unter der Bevölkerung auch seinen Spitznamen, der Night Hunter. Einst lebte eine junge Frau auf Nostramo. Das tägliche Leben auf diesem unwirklichen Planeten konnte selbst den stärksten Geist brechen. Sie schaffte es jedoch, sich in dieser Umgebung durchzusetzen und eine zumindest erwähnenswerte Existenz aufzubauen. Es war die Liebe zu ihrem Ehemann, die ihr die Kraft gab, sich in dieser Welt zu behaupten. Doch der Tod auf Nostramo war allgegenwärtig und schlug mit harter Hand zu. Viel zu früh musste die junge Frau von ihrem Mann Abschied nehmen und selbst seinen Körper nahm sie ihr, um ihn auf dieser rohstoffarmen Welt wieder zu verwerten. Mit dem Verlust ihrer Liebe schwand auch ihre Hoffnung. In ihrer winzigen und spärlich beleuchteten Wohnung saß sie einsam und trauernd auf dem Bett, das sie sich einst so viele Jahre geteilt hatten. Sie breitete den besten Anzug ihres einstigen Gattens auf dem Bett aus und trug symbolisch ihr schönstes Kleid. Es fiel ihr schwer, ihre Tränen zurückzuhalten, und die Erinnerung an die Abende, an denen er sie ihr aus dem Gesicht wischte, machten es nicht leichter. Wenig war ihr von ihm geblieben. Der zerknitterte Anzug neben ihr gab kaum seine Gestalt wieder, und selbst die wenigen Bilder, die sie noch hatte, schienen ihr fremd. Das Gesicht ihres Mannes verschwamm immer mehr in ihrem Kopf, und mit der verblassenen Erinnerung schwand auch ihr Lebenswille. Bereit, ihm ins nächste Leben zu folgen, legte sie ihre Hände über die Ohren, um dem Jaulen und Schreien des uralten Lüfters zumindest für einen Moment zu entkommen, und kehrte mit geschlossenen Augen ein letztes Mal tief in sich. Kaum hörbar und mit einer abstoßenden Höflichkeit schritt das Unheil durch die Finsternis in die jämmerlich beleuchtete Wohnung. Sie spürte seine Präsenz und wusste, wer er war, jedoch nicht, warum er zu ihr kam. Gehüllt in Gewändern, die aus den Lumpen dutzender geplünderter Leichen zusammengenäht waren und so abstoßend waren, dass nur der Neidhunter es wagen würde, sie zu tragen. Konrad war gekommen, um sie für ihre Sünden zu bestrafen. Sie fragte ihn, wieso. Sie hatte nichts Unrechtes getan. Es war naiv, nein, dumm von ihr zu glauben, dass sie das Recht hatte, über Leben und Tod ihres Fleisches zu entscheiden, und sie war gerade dabei, das schlimmste aller Verbrechen an diesem zu verüben. Konrad war auf Nostramo, um diese Welt und ihre Bewohner zu retten. Er war der Ansicht, Nostramo könne nie aus der Dunkelheit emporsteigen, wenn Menschen den Wert ihres Lebens und ihrer Kultur durch Suizide mindern. Er erklärte ihr, dass einst in antiken Zivilisationen Selbstmörder unehrenhaft verscharrt wurden und der gescheiterte Versuch eine Exekution nach sich zog. Die Zukunft, die er für Nostramo sah, verlangte eine Ordnung, die sich nur durch Furcht aufrechterhalten ließ. Sie würde mit ihrer Tat weitere Nachahmer ermutigen, also muss sie sterben, um die Furcht zu nähren. Unsicher erwiderte sie flüsternd, dass es doch ihr Wunsch sei zu sterben. Doch Konrad versicherte ihr, dass dies nicht der Tod sein wird, den sie sich wünsche. In seiner neu geschaffenen Weltordnung sollte kein Vergehen ungestraft bleiben, nicht einmal Verbrechen gegen sich selbst.
Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome to the Primarch lore video on Konrad Curse, the Night Haunter, who, in my humble opinion, is probably the most interesting of all the God Emperor's 20 sons. For Konrad is not a hero, but nor is he a villain. He is a big part of what has always fascinated me about Warhammer 40k. Because it seems to strive to present a universe as it is, not as how it should be or how it could be. In the 41st millennium, even the most honourable of heroes can have flaws, and even the most vile of villains can have redeeming qualities. Konrad was a result of the God Emperor's work. He was a result of Nostramo. He was a result of his own ideas and moral philosophy. He was a result of 1,000 little choices made at 1,000 different moments, and of course the result of the warp. On the one hand, he rescued an entire world from the tyrannical grips of criminal syndicates, who ruled through fear and terror. He gave Nostramo order, peace, and law. On the other hand, he did the rescuing by viciously torturing to death anyone and everyone that did not meet his standards of justice. And in the eyes of the Night Haunter, whose justice was an absolute, a man who brutally beat and murdered other men, and a child who stole an apple so as to not starve, were the precise moral equivalents of one another. Criminals. Under the rule of Konrad Curse, Nostramo enjoyed a period of prosperity unparalleled in all its history. But simultaneously, under the rule of the Night Haunter, the few also suffered more than the many could ever possibly imagine. Which brings us to the question, what cost are we willing to pay for the prosperity of the many? How much must the few suffer to ensure that prosperity? And how much suffering is too much before the many start questioning the price they may all one day be asked to pay? It is an interesting question, to be sure, and it is also a very, very, very grey question, because there is undeniable moral wrong in torturing someone to death for stealing an apple. And at the very same time, it is also undeniably morally good that 1,000 people are prospering on a planet that previously had been an absolute hellhole for the overwhelming majority of its populace. And now that I have hopefully explained to you why you should be so interested in Konrad Curze, let us move onwards, shall we, into the video itself, starting with a little bit of an author's note here. I perhaps should have said at the beginning of this video, welcome back to Konrad Curze, because he was the subject of the first Primarch lore video I ever made for 40k subscribers specials. I picked him for the exact same reason as I stated previously, because I think he's probably the most interesting of all of the Primarchs. And also because at the time, we did not know that much about Konrad Curze. We knew mostly about his philosophy, about how he acted, about how cruel he could be, and yet also about the undeniable results of his cruelty, which made him a very interesting piece. But now, with the release of the Konrad Curze Primarch book, his journey has come to an end. Or, well, at the very least, it seems as if it has come to an end. Who knows what the future may hold. And speaking of the book, I will be making a separate video on that book as well, because I think it is a very interesting piece that sheds both a lot of light on Konrad Curze, but I also think it is a book that is somewhat flawed. So, if you're interested in that, I'll be releasing that video probably somewhere near the weekend or so. Right then, let us get on with this, well, not quite remake really, but reinterpretation of the Konrad Curze lore video. And we start, of course, on Terra, deep beneath the Tibetan mountains in the Emperor's laboratory, where Konrad Curze was sleeping soundly in his gestation pod, alongside his 19 brothers. These were the Primarchs, the results of the God Emperor's first great work, although at this point in time he was not yet known as the God Emperor, a title that would eventually, I would say, be forced upon him, as it was also a title that he himself had always vehemently refused. But what other title should one grant to a being such as the Emperor? A man who had unified Terra beneath his rule, and was even now in the process of finalizing his plans for the conquests of the galaxy. And it was as a part of this plan that he was creating his 20 sons, from a combination of advanced technology, biomancy, and magic. Or at least, that is as good a word for it as anything. For there are forces in the 41st millennium that can best be described by using that archaic word, the gods. And it was with these very gods of chaos that the Emperor had treated for the secrets required to create his 20 perfect sons. He had made a deal with these divine entities, but the God Emperor had no intentions of ever fulfilling his side of the bargain. He recognized these gods as the vile, destructive entities that they were, and he would personally seek to destroy them by utilizing the very things they allowed him to create, the Primarchs. Unfortunately for the God Emperor, the gods were not so cooperative as to simply just stand by and watch their own unfolding destruction. And so they set in motion their own plans to interfere with the Emperor's grand designs. And whilst the gods are far from omnipotent, they possess a certain perspective, far beyond that of mortal men. They can perceive the weave of reality, the future and the past. They can see how it splits and how it merges, and they can manipulate this weave to their benefit. The plans of the gods are centuries, if not millennia, in the making, and they weave a tangled web indeed. And perhaps, if all 4 of the primary chaos deities were of a unified purpose, they could create a future that was truly fixed, truly inescapable. But unfortunately for them, they harbor almost as much resentment for one another as they did for the Emperor. It was only in the face of a truly dire threat to their very existence that they were able to unify for however briefly. And the first step in their grand plans was the scattering of the Emperor's sons. This they achieved by manipulating both the past and the future simultaneously. Along with the exploitation of a plot hole or two, they succeeded in opening up a warp rift within the Emperor's laboratory. It was this tunnel through space and time that devoured the 20 gestation pods and spat them out onto 20 different planets scattered throughout the galaxy. These planets would invariably be shaped by the coming of the Primarchs, and the Primarchs would in turn be shaped by the planets, their culture, tradition, location, environment, and, of course, often less than ideal situations. The planet that Conrad's gestation pod would descend upon was one of the worst. Indeed, I would go so far as to say that only one of his brothers could claim the honor of having arrived on an even worse world. That would be Mortarion, whose planet was quite literally dominated by giant man-eating zombie monsters that lived in mountaintop castles, surrounded by virulent poisonous fog so vicious that it would kill an unprotected man in mere minutes. So yeah, in the contest of worst planet ever, I think Mortarion has a decided advantage. But Nostramo would be a very close second. Nostramo was a night world. Near the outer fringes of what would eventually become known as the Ultima Segmentum, it orbited a small, weak, dying star, whose light was utterly incapable of breaching the constant, ever-present layer of toxic pollutants that hung heavy in Nostramo's atmosphere. This pollutant was a result of Nostramo's primary industry, being the digging, the mining, and the refining of the incredibly rare and remarkably durable metal known as adamantium. And it was in the business of extracting and working this metal that the vast majority of the population was engaged. Said population lived in 5 major hive cities, all located near the equator of Nostramo, the only place that remained relatively habitable, as the rest of the planet was a polluted, frigid hellscape. Aforementioned population consisted of mostly baseline humanity, albeit with a handful of minor mutations brought on presumably by the environment. For example, their eyes had evolved to see better in extremely low light conditions. A very sensible mutation considering that even the brightest and most radiant of days on Nostramo would only ever barely suffice to backlight the ever-present smog that hung heavily over the planet. The near-complete and utter lack of direct sunlight also resulted in albino children being born in far greater quantity than in baseline humanity. Additionally, various ailments caused by vitamin D deficiency was also common amongst the population, things such as osteoporosis, asthma, or inflammations. Small surprise, I suppose. You might think this would be easy to cure with access to vitamin D supplements, but this was not the kind of world where the civilian populace had access to, well, much, if anything, in the way of even the most basic forms of healthcare. Because the population at large existed in a state little better than outright slavery, working seemingly endless shifts in the forges, the factories, the mines, and the foundries. The population toiled unceasingly beneath the ever-watchful gaze of the gangs. For they were the true rulers of Nostramo, a world where might absolutely made right, and the only law was that created by those strong enough to dictate it to others. They may have styled themselves with pretty titles such as counts, barons, marquises, or kings, but in reality the only noble thing with any of them were just those very self-same empty titles. They were in reality nothing more than vast criminal organizations, syndicates and confederations of countless gangs and bands of ruffians, brigands, murderers, thieves, arsonists, and fraudsters. And so it should come as little surprise that whilst Nostramo was an incredibly blessed world, overflowing with mineral resources that could be traded through interstellar trade with other nearby civilizations for astronomical quantities of gold, wealth, and resources, very little, if any, of that ever reached the general populace. Almost all of it was hoarded and jealously guarded by the noble classes, who only opened their coffers when it was time to wage war on their competition. Then they would hire the various lesser gangs to rape and pillage their opposition's territories. And for a brief but glorious moment, the wealth would flow. At least a little bit. But whilst the gangs could benefit from these periods of instability and warfare, for the general populace it simply meant that yet further hardships would be heaped upon them. And yet, it says a lot about Nostramo that it was not the constant gang warfare that killed the most of Nostramo's citizens. It was not crime. It was not murder. It was not work accidents or work-related fatalities. And as you can probably imagine, the gangs gave nary a single shit about safety precautions. Instead, the leading cause of death on Nostramo was quite simply suicide. Because for many, there appeared to be no other way out. The average Nostraman had practically no chance of ever improving his lot in life, and the only chance he might have would be to, well, join his oppressors, become a criminal himself, and either join the gangs outright, or at the very least prey upon those who were even weaker than himself. Unsurprisingly, this led to quite the awe-inspiring bump in the crime statistics. Because when people realize that there is literally no way out beyond death or crimes, well, most people will at least try the criminal life out first. And for many, that ended in death. They try to rob the wrong person and get shot or stabbed. They would rob the wrong gang and get hunted down and hung up on a lamppost somewhere as an example to others with ambitions beyond their stations. Or he might succeed. He might steal something valuable, or at the very least valuable by his relative reckoning. He might be able to live in relative comfort for a week or perhaps two. And once a person that has lived his entire life in absolute destitute poverty, in absolutely hopeless conditions, first finds that he has the power to improve his life by taking from others, what do you reckon the odds are that he'll stop? And it's not like the Nostraman justice system will provide much in the way of deterrence either. Most of the major houses run their own private police forces and their own private justice systems. Justice, in this case, with heavy quotation marks, and, come to think of it, police might not be the correct word either. Enforcers might be closer to the truth. And that was only when the noble houses decided to at least put on a mild pretense that they were attempting to maintain law and order. You know, when they could be bothered to pretend that they had some form of impartiality, or that they had public employees doing the policing, whilst some houses couldn't even be bothered with that much and simply just used the gangs as police forces. No uniformed officers, just a vast quantity of bully boys to beat and berate anyone stupid enough to argue. This was the pitch-black world, both figuratively and literally, that Conrad Curse descended upon in his gestation pod. In a brief incandescent meteoric descent which provided much of the population of Nostramo Quintus, the largest hive world on the planet, with their first ever glimpse of true light. Unfortunately, or depending upon your perception of things, fortunately, it would also be the last glimpse of illumination that thousands, if not tens of thousands of Nostramans would ever see, as the Primarch's armored gestation pod impacted upon Hive Quintus with the force of a meteorite, slicing effortlessly through countless dozens of building blocks until finally smashing into the planet's adamantite crust, burrowing itself so deep in the earth that the only thing that remained was a deep, black, cratered hole. Whatever fetid warp tide it was that had brought Conrad Curse to Nostramo, it had made damn sure that he entered with style, having more fired him at the planet than anything else, as his arrival resembled far more an orbital bombardment than a landing. Now, granted, I suppose it is reasonable to understand that the Emperor's technicians working on massive armored gestation pods hooked up to building block-sized machinery buried beneath a mountain would not have imagined in their wildest dreams that they would ever have been required to outfit the thing to fly, much less land. But even so, Conrad's arrival was excessively violent, even when compared to the arrivals of the other Primarchs. I guess a certain poetic point is being made here. Conrad Curse arrived as he meant to stay, and as he meant to eventually leave. In blood. But for now, at least, the Nostraman populace and its criminal syndicates remained blissfully unaware of what the dramatic event had brought to their home world, and what it heralded for their future. It had certainly been a catastrophe, an armored drop pod essentially striking a major hive city, the major hive city of the planet, is going to result in a lot of death and mangled limbs. But neither of those are rarities on Nostramo. And whilst this certainly was one of the bigger catastrophes, it was swiftly covered up, like all of the other death and destruction. In this case, literally. The crater and the hole leading deep down into the planet's crust were simply filled up with gravel, and the place paved over. The local populace, however, had a strange foreboding of the place, and avoided it wherever possible, considering it a sign of extremely ill fortune. But for the people of the hive city Nostramo Quintus, their bad luck was just beginning, as on one particularly dark and stormy night, even by Nostraman standards, Conrad Curse dug his way out from beneath the rubble. Now, of course, it should have been absolutely impossible for the infant that Conrad was at this point to even survive the impact, and much less conceivable that the child could then have stripped his own gestation pod and fashioned crude instruments with which to dig his way through God Emperor only knows how many tons of twisted steel and debris all the way to the surface. And yet, that is precisely what Konrad Curze had done. For he, of course, was no ordinary infant. He was one of the Emperor's 20 perfect sons, a Primarch, a being so far beyond what is humanly possible that it is frankly difficult to imagine. I quite like my original analogies from the video I made quite a while ago, where I essentially said that a Primarch would be more than able to take on a dozen fully armed and armoured space marines in his underwear, and come away with barely a scratch. And to make him fight against a regular human would be to have a human infant, a regular one in this case, be tossed into a vast pit containing 666 exceedingly angry and unreasonable bears, and then ask the infant to climb his way back out again. That is what a Primarch is. And in the case of Konrad Curze, he was also so much more. All the Primarchs had been genetically engineered and essentially programmed to fulfill certain roles in the future. They were all intended to be generals, to be leaders of the Space Marine legions, but they were also intended to be so much more than that. Guilliman, for example, was intended to be the ultimate administrator, the perfect bureaucrat. Fulgrim was an artisan, Jagatai Khan was a hunter, Russ was the executioner and the enforcer. Curze, well, he was intended to be the judge, the jury, and if need be, the executioner. If the Emperor's plans had come to full fruition, Konrad Curze would have been the absolute ultimate authority on anything that had to do with the law and justice in the Imperium, able to divide himself entirely from all sentiment, of all personal opinions, and all inconsequential information, to deliver a flawless verdict that would ensure justice every time. But regrettably, Konrad Curze had not finished his education. He had received all of the hard, cold information via hypnotic indoctrination within his gestation pod. He had a perfect encyclopedic understanding of every law ever written, of every concept of law, and every idea of justice. But where he was grievously lacking was in his understanding of morality and the simple basics of the human condition. And unlike practically every one of his brothers, he never got to learn any of this. He was never adopted. He was never brought in by other people, or even just captured by other humans like one of his brothers. And so he never really had any opportunity to learn. It didn't help either that Konrad's first encounter with wider humanity was a somewhat combative one. Or, nay, let me rephrase that, a somewhat predatory one. For whilst Konrad Curze was a Primarch and could push himself far beyond human limitations, even his superhuman physiology had been pushed to the absolute breaking point. He was drawing upon the last reservoir of strength when he finally broke the surface. He needed nourishment, and he needed it immediately. And, well, what kind of game do you think is most abundantly available in a hive city located on a frozen hellhole planet covered by eternal night? Yes. But hey, On the bright side, cannibalism was a bit of a Nostraman tradition. There were few families on Nostramo that could truthfully say that they had never indulged in a little bit of sweet pork on occasion when times were particularly hard, and food was even more scarce than usual, and there were even parts of Nostraman society that was straight up cannibalistic. Gangs that operated not so much with gang territory as with gang hunting grounds. Even the other Nostraman gangs usually kept a bit of distance between themselves and those batshit insane lunatics. I mean, it's one thing to stab a man and take his wallet. Eating him? Somehow that crossed the line even for most Nostramans. But Curse unfortunately did not have the luxury of choice. And so his first encounter, as mentioned, was a rather predatory one. But Conrad Curse was not your average day-to-day cannibal. He was a Primarch, and Primarchs have quite the toolkit of various biological functions that will allow them to survive virtually anything. And one of these is the ability to devour not only the flesh of practically any living creature without any ill effects, but also the ability to devour their memory. If Curse had landed in less of a hellhole, his first prey may have been a deer, or a rabbit, or a rat, or a brown bear if he was feeling ambitious. And through consuming the flesh of the animal, he would gain a wealth of information. These berries are good to eat. These are not. This is where water is located. These are the creatures that I prey upon. These are the creatures that I avoid. But on Nostramo, where Conrad Curse's first meal in all due likelihood was some low-level criminal with a rap sheet so long it was measured in volumes, the nature of the information gathered would assuredly be of a very different nature. These are the people I prey upon. These are the ones I have killed, stabbed, shot, beaten, stolen from, and abused. And these are the people that have abused me in turn. These are the people who frighten me, who terrorize me, who steal what little I have. It would be a tale of near unparalleled horror. And so Curse's first meal would have taught him one thing beyond any other. That this was a world that appeared to be in complete contrast to his sense of justice, which had been programmed into him at his very creation. And try to imagine for a moment Conrad Curse's mind at this point. He was but a child, but he was still in possession of vast amounts of knowledge. He did not necessarily know how to comprehend it, however, how to understand it. The Primarch book gives a very excellent example of this, where Conrad Curse knows that he must dig out a bullet that has lodged itself in his shoulder. He knows that if he does not, the wound will become inflamed. And whilst that will not kill him, it will hinder his movements. And that is a bad thing. Now, Curse doesn't know why it will become inflamed. Curse doesn't even know what inflammation is. But he has the knowledge, and so he simply acts upon what he knows. And when he assimilated the memories of that first criminal, his only frame of reference was all of the laws he knew, all of the concepts of justice that he knew but did not understand. And so when young Conrad assimilated the memories of his first victim, all he saw was a criminal. For he was a criminal. He had committed crimes. But were they indefensible? Did he kill to protect someone, perhaps? Did he steal to feed his family? Did he commit crimes not out of want or greed, but out of desperation? There is a very good reason why, in modern law, we have the concept of ameliorating circumstances. A concept that Conrad Curse undoubtedly knew, but again that he did not understand. The concept of a circumstance in which a crime is less severe is, when you think about it, a pretty damn complex idea that requires a lot more knowledge beyond the law. It requires an understanding of circumstance, of human nature, and of necessity. What was the crime? What were the circumstances? Were they truly ameliorating, or were they aggravating? And how would that affect the sentence? Would it be lessened or harshened? And perhaps the circumstances dictate whether or not a crime has been committed at all. Jaywalking is technically a crime in several places, but you're not going to be convicted for it. You're not going to get hauled off the street for it. But if your jaywalking caused an accident, well, that changes things. But obviously, these ideas and concepts were far beyond the mind of a, well, literally week-old child, and so he could not comprehend it. What he could understand, however, was that the man was a criminal. He understood this because the man had clearly broken laws. Conrad had then found him, and Conrad had killed him. Now the man could never break a law again. Ergo, he was no longer a criminal, and justice had been served. In this case, quite literally. Although probably not on a silver platter. And as Conrad continued to prey upon the populace of Nostramo Quintus, it's not like things would be getting any better. Due to the divide between the social classes, his diet would undoubtedly consist virtually exclusively of criminals of various stripes. And due to his sense of justice, he would be very unlikely to prey upon someone he did not already know was a criminal in some way, shape, or form. And it's not like it would be difficult to hunt him down. Every time he om-nom-nommed one criminal scumbag, he would learn the crimes, the names, and the locations of all of his other criminal scumbag friends, for the next time Conrad got a little peckish. And soon, it evolved beyond merely satisfying his hunger.